tonight. Cracks in the evangelical shield.
What we found in that survey was that attitudes became more negative towards Israel.
As the Gaza war rages on, support for Israel eroding among young evangelical Christians. Plus, new relief for student debt.
Colleges and universities don't want anything to change. They've got a gravy train right now.
As the cost of college skyrockets. And a landmark program to stamp out HIV/AIDS.
We have saved 25 million lives, prevented HIV/AIDS transmission.
Now under fire for a progressive agenda. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Israel pushes back against the possibility of a Palestinian state without preconditions. Good evening in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. Israel's government is rejecting international calls for the unilateral creation of a Palestinian state. In a vote today, 99 out of 120 Knesset members backed a motion from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying any progress toward statehood will come through negotiations, not declarations.
The Knesset voted overwhelmingly to oppose any attempt to unilaterally impose a Palestinian state on Israel. Such an attempt will only endanger Israel and will prevent the genuine peace that we all seek. Peace can only be achieved after we achieve total victory over Hamas and through direct negotiations between the parties, direct negotiations without preconditions.
Meanwhile, ceasefire negotiations continue between Israel and Hamas. A White House envoy is in Egypt tonight, assisting in hostage release discussions. Here at home, we're seeing a shift among younger Christians and their approval of Israel. Some experts warn a decline in support could mark a turning point in the longstanding allied relationship between American evangelicals and the Jewish state. Brody Carter reports on what it could mean for U.S.-Israeli relations as a whole.
A series of polls show support for Israel among American evangelicals under 30 fell more than 35% in just 3 years. There's added concern that misinformation across social media regarding the war in Gaza could lead to an even greater drop.
The reason why I think young evangelicals might remain very skeptical and not particularly supportive of Israel is because they're being bombarded with, I don't want to say anti-Israel messages, but not particularly favorable messages toward Israel at the time when they're forming their foreign policy beliefs.
3 surveys conducted by researchers at Boston University and UNC Pembroke from 2018 to 2021 indicate this change came during a pivotal turn in Israel-Palestine relations.
And what we found in that survey was that attitudes became more negative towards Israel.
As of 2021, roughly 1/3 of young evangelicals surveyed support Israel, compared to more than 2/3 in 2018. During that same period, support for Palestinians rose from 5% to almost 25%.
Free Palestine!
Also, the number of respondents saying they support neither Israel nor Palestine nearly doubled from 25% to almost 50%.
What has changed is the introduction of social media. Younger people now have much more diverse opportunity to get information than the other generations in the past did not have.
Another finding shows pastors are changing, including a drift in their support of Israel and how they interpret the Bible.
And that change is from a more pro-Israel, premillennial dispensationalist position to one that really does not see much importance to the contemporary state of Israel or the Jewish people in the end times and in the second coming of Jesus Christ.
The authors have published their findings in their book, Christian Zionism in the 21st Century, American Evangelical Opinion on Israel.
We have to understand.
Dr. Yoav Fromer at Tel Aviv University emphasizes the importance of this study.
That without the United States, Israel will not exist. And again, I say this as an Israeli.
He adds the future of the Jewish state depends on the next generation of U.S. evangelicals.
I don't know if my children will have a country to live in.
One unexpected outcome identified by doctors Bari and Bouman is how this younger generation that is sometimes bombarded with pro-Israel messages can be turned off, comparing it to teenage angst or rebellion.
So on the one hand, we found that socializing with other young evangelicals who support Israel reduces support for Israel. On the other hand, we found that young evangelicals are very strongly motivated by perceptions of fairness. How fairly do Israelis treat Palestinians in the occupied territories? And if they feel that they're treated fairly, right, then they're more likely to support Israel.
The authors note several generational shifts, including changing beliefs on end-time prophecy and how Israel figures into it, which could potentially reshape the overall evangelical movement itself. They challenge leaders to engage young believers by using new methods and platforms that resonate with them. Brody Carter, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Brody. And on America's college campuses, anti-Semitism is a huge and growing problem. The U.S. has now surpassed more than 1,000 anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses, all of those taking place since October 7th. According to the president of the Jewish College Organization, Hillel International, 56% of Jewish students say they feel unsafe on campus. And with that, let's bring in Rabbi Abraham Cooper, director of the Global Social Action Agenda for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Rabbi Cooper, welcome. Good to have you as always. So when you hear the stories and the cases about anti-Semitism and these students, these Jewish students who are scared just to go to class, what's your reaction?
Well, obviously, the Simon Wiesenthal Center and all the other Jewish groups are pushing back hard. We expect and demand of universities to see to it that their students can be in an environment where they could study without being intimidated or frankly attacked. And we're about to publish our own study involving close to 30 universities across the U.S., including some of the top schools in the country, in which, from the administration on down, a complete failure, ignorance maybe, but a free pass to those promoting a pro-Hamas narrative in their universities, and making sure that Zionism is a dirty word and Zionists are fair game. That has to be changed. It's against our laws, and we're pushing back with Title VI. Many of the Jewish groups are involved with that. But more importantly, I think that Jewish students need to demand and should get just equal treatment to everyone else. Every other group is "quote unquote" protected, and they should be. Part of what's obviously impacting not just students on campus but across the board is the success of pro-Hamas campaigners going to the streets, blocking airport entrances, and generally driving a narrative that now focuses on the Gazans who are in the middle of the firefight, of course, only placed in danger because of Hamas, but with Israel no longer able to push the concerns over American and Israeli hostages still being held by Hamas. So what happens outside the campus is also poisoning the environment inside the campus.
Well, I want to ask you, today the Knesset backed Prime Minister Netanyahu in objecting to a unilateral Palestinian state. The Prime Minister says Hamas needs to be defeated before there's talk of a Palestinian state. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that most Jews in Israel and here do agree with it. They're a terrorist entity. They have promised to do more if they're given the chance to do it. They have tremendous financial backing from Iran, from Qatar and others. And they do have to be defeated to send a message throughout the Middle East that Israel has the ability to do so. But I would just add one more point. The negotiations over a Palestinian state would be with the Palestinian Authority. As we speak, there's a law in the books, and checks are cut every month, that every Palestinian terrorist who kills or maims an Israeli Jew is financially rewarded for that every month. It's like a welfare check. And if they are deceased, then their families continue to get that kind of financial support. That is from Abbas's Palestinian Authority. So for Israelis, left, right, and center, they're saying, you want to talk about a Palestinian state now? Who in God's name are we supposed to be negotiating with? People who
Rabbi Cooper,
mass murder us? Got it.
Yeah. We have to leave it there tonight, but we always love having you on. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Jenna.
Rabbi Abraham Cooper.
Report.
Thank you. All right, well, in a controversial move by the White House, student loan forgiveness could be on the way for more than 150,000 borrowers. The plan is part of a major Biden administration push to cancel student debt and comes after the Supreme Court ruled against its first attempt last summer. The administration's new proposal aims to provide more than a dozen new pathways to debt cancellation, targeting specific groups of borrowers. The White House says it will send out an email to 153,000 people, informing them they now qualify for student loan forgiveness. The automatic debt relief brings the total number of Americans approved for loan cancellations to 3.9 million. Those receiving an email from the president are enrolled in the newest student loan payment plan called the SAVE Plan. The proposal offers 17 paths to relief for student loan borrowers. Well, college is indeed expensive. The average cost of a college education has nearly tripled over the past 4 decades, and there is no sign it's slowing down. As the White House works to forgive loans on the back end, House Republicans say they have a solution to stop students from getting placed out in the first place. As Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka reports, the GOP measure includes putting the colleges themselves on the hook for the tuition.
Last year, the average annual cost of a public 4-year university hit almost $11,000 for in-state students. It jumps to about $28,000 if you're out of state. North Carolina Republican Virginia Foxx says it's out of control.
I want to preserve in this country the opportunity for people to get a good education and work hard and succeed.
Fox's College Cost Reduction Act aims to lower costs by shifting some of the student debt to the institutions.
Colleges have no incentive whatsoever to hold down the cost of getting an education because Congress has appropriated more and more money, and the colleges raise their tuition in accordance with that. And what we want to do is have the colleges have skin in the game.
The bill would lower how much students could borrow on the front end for school. It would also put colleges on the hook for loan repayments if a student failed to pay their debts, while also changing funding for schools based on student outcomes. Foxx calls the plan better than the attempted loan cancellation by the Biden administration.
The students take unsustainable debt, and then they can't pay it back, and then the taxpayers go on the hook for it. And under the Biden administration, they're accelerating that process by trying to transfer the debt that students have accrued themselves to the taxpayers. That is wrong.
Some higher education groups raise concerns that schools have no control over how students perform in the labor market and shouldn't be held responsible for failed loan repayments. Democrats argue that limiting federal student loans would force students into the private student loan market.
But on balance, the havoc that this bill would wreak in our higher education system and the pain it would inflict on students and families far outweigh any minor improvements the bill may make.
Colleges and universities don't want anything to change. They've got a gravy train right now, and they'd like everything to stay the way it is. We want them to be accountable.
The House Education Committee approved the bill along party lines, and it now awaits a date on the House floor. Matt Galka, CBN News.
Thank you, Matt. Well, 2 years of fighting coming up. A look at where war-torn Ukraine stands today. Welcome back. 2 years ago on Saturday, Russia began its brutal invasion of Ukraine. And tonight, hope for a Ukrainian victory is fading. With Western aid starting to slow, Kyiv says it's running out of supplies. And a new report from the International Institute of Strategic Studies says Russia's military can maintain the fight for years to come. Let's bring in Hillary Powell. Hillary, a recent Pew Research poll found 74% of Americans think the war in Ukraine is of U.S. national interest. What's the sentiment around the world?
Jenna, it's pretty stark. Although support for Ukraine remains really high across the European Union, a recent poll reports just 1 in 10 Europeans actually believe that Ukraine can defeat Russia. Now, this week, a Russian flag now flies in the Russian-occupied part of the Kherson region and also in a key town in eastern Ukraine where troops withdrew due to dwindling supplies there. At this point, people polled say some form of compromise settlement should be most likely the solution to the war. And European Union countries just agreed on a new package of sanctions against Russia to target individuals and businesses they suspect of assisting Moscow, including Chinese companies.
Hillary, 2 years in, where does the fighting stand?
Well, you know, Ukrainian President Zelensky says delays in weapons deliveries from Western allies can open the door for Russian advances, and they are signs of war fatigue in the area, with European countries struggling to find enough stocks to send to Ukraine. Another danger, Human Rights Watch reports about 30% of Ukraine's territory is infested with landmines. That's not something you think about a lot, but these weapons are known to kill and injure people long after armed conflicts end. The Pentagon says there are tough choices ahead with dwindling aid.
Ukraine will have to make choices and decisions on what cities, what towns they can hold with what they have and what partners can continue to supply them.
Now, international pressure is, of course, growing on the U.S. to establish more funding for Ukraine.
But there's some pushback on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, there's pushback, and right now there's a bipartisan push in the House to pass a big foreign aid package, but it's really unclear if GOP leadership will consider it. President Biden wants Americans to know that the money he's seeking for Ukraine would actually be spent here in the United States in factories that make munitions and missiles. $66 billion is the aid package they're seeking for Ukraine, but it is set to include almost $48 billion for plants in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania. That's coming from reports from the AP, and the State Department is speaking to the need as well.
Ukraine will continue to defend itself, even in the absence of a supplemental funding request passing Congress. That is without a doubt. You have seen them fight with bravery. You've seen them fight with skill, and we fully expect that they will continue to do so, and they will continue to make gains against Russia, as they have done in the Black Sea. But the situation will be very difficult. When you don't have the ammunition you need on the front lines, you're going to be vulnerable.
Now, President Biden says he's calling it unethical if the U.S. does not provide more aid, but it remains to be seen if that's really actually attainable in Congress. Jenna?
All right, Hillary Powell, thank you very much. What has helped prevent HIV and AIDS, protecting more than 25 million people in the process? Now, though, a life-saving program is in jeopardy. We'll explain why after this. Well, over the last 20 years, an American initiative to stop HIV/AIDS has saved millions of lives worldwide, but now its future is in jeopardy. That's because some lawmakers fear the program is being used to spread a progressive agenda overseas. Jennifer Wishon explains.
Each year, America offers billions of dollars in aid around the world. But one program in particular has returned remarkable results. U.S. taxpayers have saved a generation of Africans through the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, created by President George W. Bush 20 years ago. At the time, HIV infected 30 million Africans, and 14 million children had lost their parents. In some regions, life expectancy had fallen by 20 years before PEPFAR reversed the tide.
It has saved 25 million lives, prevented HIV/AIDS transmission from affecting children in 5.5 million children,
making it wildly popular abroad and here at home. But today, PEPFAR faces an uncertain future. Its 5-year reauthorization is overdue, and some conservative lawmakers and pro-life groups are sounding the alarm. They fear life-saving tax dollars are being drained from PEPFAR to advance abortion and other global agendas of the Biden administration.
This is taking money away from monies that would be used to save human lives to advance a political agenda.
When President Bush launched PEPFAR and President Trump last authorized it, an executive order barred the program from spending tax dollars on abortion under the so-called Mexico City policy. President Biden rescinded it.
And they use the word, it integrates sexual and reproductive health and rights, and of course that means abortion.
Pro-life groups say that allows American tax dollars to flow unfettered to non-governmental organizations that provide those services. The Biden administration says that's not the case.
PEPFAR has never been an abortion program. It is not and will never be.
He points to a 1973 amendment which prohibits foreign aid from funding abortions overseas, but pro-life groups say it's happening.
We've seen over $1 billion go to these organizations whose primary purpose is to advocate for and promote abortion.
In addition to abortion, critics say tax dollars are also being used to lobby against pro-life laws in some African countries.
Most of the African countries are solidly pro-life, and they are under siege by the NGOs that we are supporting.
In a letter to Congress, 130 African parliament and faith leaders expressed concerns and suspicions that PEPFAR funding is supporting practices, including abortion, that violate our core beliefs concerning life, family, and religion. Still, many, including the founder of PEPFAR, argue the program is by its nature life-giving. President Bush writing, "There is no program more pro-life than one that has saved more than 25 million lives. I urge Congress to reauthorize PEPFAR for another 5 years without delay." Bush and others calling for immediate reauthorization argue the worth of America's international word is at stake. But Perkins calls pushing liberal values on our African allies a dangerous approach.
We see the world right now almost on fire. And we have many of these allies in Africa where we see a lot of these terrorist organizations now moving to set up headquarters. We're pushing many of these countries that should be allies and have been into the arms of others because we are forcing them to embrace an agenda that runs counter to the values of those countries.
Now, while Congress deliberates, AIDS patients around the world are watching intently.
It's saving a lot of people, especially here in Africa, here in Kenya, and even me. I'm here because of PEPFAR funding of ARVs. If it's not there, I'm dead.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Finally tonight, a surprising show of horsepower on the highway. Drivers in Philadelphia were taken aback Tuesday when they kept getting passed, not by a car, but instead by a high-power horse. Police say the horse somehow escaped one of the city's urban riding clubs. The animal was eventually corralled by police. And that's going to do it for Faith Nation. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.